The night over Musutafu was calm. Too calm. The city lights stretched across the skyline like a sea of stars, and the usual rhythm of hero patrols continued without incident. Far above the streets, pro-heroes moved across rooftops, while emergency sirens hummed faintly in the distance. For most people, it was just another peaceful night under the protection of hero society. But then, the sky screamed. A violent ripple tore through the clouds without warning. The air itself seemed to twist and fracture, forming a spiraling distortion that pulsed with blinding blue lightning. People across the city looked up. At first, many assumed it was a storm. But storms didn't rip open the heavens. A jagged tear split across the sky like a wound in reality itself. Energy surged outward in chaotic waves, crackling with a sound that felt almost alive. And then something fell. A single object shot downward through the vortex, engulfed in burning energy. It slammed into an abandoned industrial district on the outskirts of Musutafu with the force of a meteor. The explosion shook the ground for miles. Windows rattled. Car alarms screamed. Birds scattered into the night sky. A massive crater now smoldered in the center of the empty complex. And from within the burning smoke, something moved. Across the city, several pro-heroes were already responding. "Did you feel that?" President Mick's voice crackled through the comms channel, his usual energetic tone replaced with alarm. "Yeah," replied Eraserhead, already leaping across rooftops toward the source of the impact. Industrial District Sector 7. "Villain attack?" another hero asked. "Unknown." The heroes moved fast. Within minutes, Eraserhead, Present Mike, and several patrol units reached the wrecked facility. The entire area looked like it had been struck by a small asteroid. Metal structures were twisted and torn apart. Concrete had cracked outward in a massive ring around the crater. Smoke drifted upward in eerie silence. But the strangest part was the figure standing at the center of it all. Tall, black armor reflecting the glow of burning debris. A long cape swayed slowly behind him, as if caught in an invisible current. And from beneath a dark helmet came a steady mechanical breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The sound echoed through the shattered industrial yard like the pulse of a machine. The heroes froze. Present Meek whispered under his breath, "Okay, that's definitely a villain entrance." Eraserhead stepped forward cautiously, his capture weapon already uncoiled around his shoulders. "Unknown individual," he called out calmly. "You're standing in restricted territory. Identify your quirk and surrender immediately." The figure did not move, not even slightly. Then slowly, the helmet tilted upward. Red lenses locked onto the heroes, and for a brief moment, none of them spoke, because something about this presence felt deeply wrong, not just dangerous, alien. Inside the armor, Darth Vader observed the world around him. The Force was chaotic here. Millions of minds. Millions of unique energies flowing through them. It felt like standing in the middle of a galaxy filled with unfamiliar stars. But these energies were strange. Uneven. Wild. Power existed everywhere on this planet, but it lacked the balance of the Force. Instead, each individual seemed to possess a single, isolated ability. Curious, Vader took one slow step forward. The gravel beneath his boots crunched softly. Eraserhead's eyes immediately glowed red. "Got him," he muttered. His quirk, erasure. activated instantly. Normally, any ability user caught in his gaze would feel their powers vanish. Villains would panic. Their quirks would shut down. But nothing happened. The armored stranger simply kept walking. Eraserhead's expression tightened. That's strange. Presence Mike frowned. What do you mean, strange? My quirk isn't working. The other heroes exchanged confused glances. That's impossible, one of them said. Every ability user had a quirk factor. Erasure always worked. Always. But this man had nothing to erase. Vader studied the group silently. Their energy signatures were unusual. Each one burned with a unique power. This world had turned personal abilities into a structured society. Heroes, villains, order enforced through strength. It reminded him of something, a primitive version of the Empire. But the Force reacted violently to the power surrounding him. It surged and twisted unpredictably, as if trying to adapt to the millions of strange abilities radiating from every human mind. Vader slowly raised one hand. The air itself seemed to tighten. Suddenly, a chunk of twisted metal lifted from the ground beside him. The heroes stiffened. What the... Present, Mike whispered. The metal scrap floated upward, effortlessly. No visible mechanism. No quirk activation signal. Just pure, invisible power. Eraserhead's eyes widened. That wasn't a quirk. That wasn't any ability he'd ever seen before. And the armored figure hadn't even spoken yet. The metal suddenly crushed in midair with a violent screech of bending steel. Then dropped to the ground. Vader's mechanical breathing echoed once more through the ruined yard. Inhale. Exhale. He slowly turned his gaze toward the distant glow of Musutafu's skyline. Millions of people. Millions of powers. An entire world built on strength. A world that could be ruled. Inside the dark helmet, Vader's voice finally emerged. Low, cold, and mechanical. An interesting planet. The force around him pulsed violently again. Unstable. Reactive. Full of untapped potential. Vader stared at the glowing city in the distance. This world. His voice dropped into a whisper carried by the wind. Will make me stronger. And somewhere far above them, the tear in the sky had not fully closed. The city of Musutafu never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of the night, lights flickered across towering buildings. Neon signs buzzed above crowded streets. And somewhere in the distance, sirens always echoed. But tonight, something else watched the city. High above the streets, standing silently on the edge of a dark rooftop, Darth Vader observed the world below. His cape moved gently in the cold night wind. The mechanical rhythm of his breathing echoed softly inside the helmet. Inhale. Exhale. The force surrounded him like a restless ocean. But it was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Millions of minds pulsed across the city. Millions of strange energies flowing through them. Each one different. Each one incomplete. Vader's red lenses scanned the streets below. A loud crash echoed through the intersection 2 blocks away. A group of villains had begun attacking a jewelry store. Explosions of strange abilities filled the street. One villain stretched his arms like rubber, smashing through a police barricade. Another fired glowing energy blasts from his palms. Pedestrians screamed and scattered. Within seconds, sirens wailed. And then, the heroes arrived. A muscular hero slammed down from the sky, creating a shockwave that cracked the pavement. Another hero fired webs of sticky fiber that wrapped around the villains instantly. Within moments, the criminals were pinned to the ground. The battle ended almost as quickly as it began. The civilians cheered. Police rushed forward to take the captured villains away. On the rooftop, Vader watched silently. To him, the fight looked primitive. These abilities were powerful, yes, but they lacked the elegance of the Force. Each individual relied on a single power. Limited. Predictable. Yet despite this weakness, the world had built an entire system around it. Heroes, villains, public rankings, order enforced by those with the strongest abilities. It reminded him of the Empire. A hierarchy built on power. But this system was unstable. Too many powerful individuals. Too many uncontrolled variables. And that meant opportunity. Later that night, deep within a narrow alley behind the city's entertainment district, a small-time villain ran desperately through the darkness. His breath came out in panicked gasps. Damn heroes! Damn heroes! Moments earlier, he had escaped a patrol unit during a robbery attempt. Now he just needed to disappear before they caught up. But as he turned the corner, he froze. A tall figure stood at the end of the alley. Black armor, black cape, a helmet that reflected the flickering streetlight, and that terrible mechanical breathing. The villain blinked in confusion. Who the hell are you supposed to... His words suddenly stopped. The man had raised one hand. The villain's body lifted off the ground instantly. Invisible fingers wrapped around his throat. His eyes widened in horror. He clawed at his neck as he floated helplessly in midair. What is this? The pressure tightened. Not enough to kill. Just enough to control. Vader stepped closer. Each step echoed slowly through the alley. You will answer my questions. His voice was deep, cold, mechanical. The villain's legs kicked uselessly. Oh, okay. Just let me breathe. The pressure loosened slightly. The criminal gasped for air. What is this world? Vader asked. The villain stared at him in confusion. What kind of stupid question is that? The invisible grip tightened again. The man screamed. Okay, I'll talk. Vader tilted his head slightly. Explain the powers I have witnessed. The villain swallowed nervously. You mean quirks? The word hung in the air. Quirks? Yeah, everyone's got one. Well, almost everyone. The man spoke quickly, terrified. They're superpowers people are born with. Some people use them to become heroes. Some become villains. Vader listened silently. Heroes maintain order? Yeah. They work with the government. There's hero schools and everything. Hero schools. Yeah. The best one is UA High School. That's where the strongest future heroes train. Vader processed the information. An entire society built around individual power. Training academies. Publicly sanctioned warriors. An organized structure of strength. It truly was not so different from the Empire. Just less efficient. Who leads these heroes? Vader asked. The villain blinked. What do you mean? The strongest. The criminal hesitated. There's rankings and stuff, but everyone knows who number one is. For the first time, Vader leaned slightly closer. Speak. The villain swallowed. One name. It's the guy everyone talks about. He's the strongest hero alive. The criminal's voice lowered slightly. Even villains spoke his name carefully. All Might. The words echoed through the alley. Vader's helmet tilted slightly. All Might. Yeah, the villain whispered nervously. They call him the symbol of peace. The guy basically keeps the whole country safe. For several seconds, Vader said nothing. The Force swirled quietly around him. A world ruled by heroes. A single symbol maintaining balance. A pillar holding the entire system together. Vader understood systems like this very well. Remove the pillar, and everything collapsed. Slowly the Sith Lord lowered his hand. The villain dropped to the ground, gasping. He scrambled backward in terror. Vader turned toward the glowing skyline of Musutafu. Billboards flashed across the distant buildings. One enormous holographic screen lit up the night sky. And there he was, a towering figure with bright blonde hair, a wide, confident smile, a hero waving to cheering crowds. All Might, the symbol of peace. Vader stared at the image in silence. Then his mechanical breathing filled the alley once more. Inhale. Exhale. His voice emerged as a cold whisper. Then he must fall. And somewhere across the city, sirens suddenly began screaming again. Musutafu was under attack. The alarms began just after midnight. Sirens screamed through the streets as emergency broadcasts flashed across every screen in the city. Multiple villain activity detected in the central commercial district. Citizens are advised to evacuate immediately. Within minutes, chaos erupted. A gang of high-level villains had launched a coordinated assault on several blocks at once. Buildings shook as explosive quirks ripped through storefronts and shattered the streets. One villain unleashed violent shockwaves that flipped police cars into the air. Another sprayed corrosive acid across the pavement, forcing civilians to run for their lives. Above them, a massive figure smashed through a bank vault door with brute strength. This wasn't a random crime. It was organized, calculated, and it was escalating fast. Across the city, pro-heroes were already mobilizing. Police barricades formed. Emergency teams evacuated civilians. Patrol heroes rushed toward the center of the disturbance. High above the streets, Eraserhead leapt across rooftops while listening to the radio chatter. Multiple villains confirmed. 6? No. 8 individuals. Possible gang operation. Presence Mike's voice crackled over the channel. Man, these guys picked the worst night to start trouble. Eraserhead's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the burning skyline ahead. Something about this feels off. The villains weren't acting like amateurs. They were aggressive, fearless, almost desperate, as if they were trying to prove something. And then suddenly, everything stopped. In the middle of the ruined intersection, one villain raised his arms and fired a violent shockwave across the street. Glass shattered. Concrete cracked. He laughed wildly. "That's right. Run!" But the laughter suddenly died in his throat. His feet slowly lifted off the ground. Huh? He blinked in confusion. Then panic flooded his face. What the? Hey! Across the battlefield, the same thing happened. Every villain froze. One by one, their bodies rose into the air. 8 criminals, all floating helplessly above the shattered street. The heroes arriving at the scene stopped dead in their tracks. What? A police officer whispered, "Is that a gravity quirk?" But no one was touching them. No wires. No visible attack. Just invisible force. The villains struggled wildly. Put us down! Who's doing this? Then the pressure came. Suddenly, their bodies jerked violently. The air around them seemed to compress. Bones cracked. Armor bent. The villains screamed. Invisible power crushed them like insects caught in a giant fist. One by one, their weapons snapped apart. Their bodies slammed into the pavement. Hard. The street went silent. Smoke drifted through the air. And from the darkness at the far end of the road, a figure slowly stepped forward. Black armor, flowing cape, a mask reflecting the flickering firelight, and that terrible mechanical breathing. Inhale, exhale. The heroes froze. Some instinct deep inside them screamed danger. Eraserhead narrowed his eyes immediately. It's him. The same mysterious individual from the industrial district. The one whose quirk he couldn't erase. A nearby hero whispered nervously. Did he just take out an entire villain gang by himself? The armored figure stopped in the middle of the ruined street. The force around him pulsed like a dark storm. To Vader, the criminals had been nothing. Weak. Disorganized. But their existence confirmed something important. This world was filled with conflict, power struggles, chaos, and systems built to contain that chaos. It was exactly the kind of world that could be reshaped. Suddenly, a roar echoed from above. Flames exploded across the sky as a blazing comet descended toward the street. The ground shattered as the figure landed between Vader and the stunned heroes. Fire surged violently from his body. The heat alone pushed everyone backward. The hero stood tall, eyes blazing with intensity. Endeavor, the number 2 hero. He scanned the scene instantly. Crushed villains, terrified civilians, and the silent armored stranger standing in the center of it all. Endeavor's voice was sharp and commanding. You? Flames burst higher around his shoulders. Are you responsible for this? Vader said nothing. His helmet slowly tilted toward the blazing hero. The force stirred again. Endeavor frowned. No fear, no hesitation, just silence. That alone made him suspicious. The hero's flames flared violently. Doesn't matter. He stepped forward. Villain or not, I'm taking you down. Without another word, Endeavor thrust both arms forward. A massive inferno erupted from his palms. Hell Spider. Multiple flaming whips exploded outward, tearing through the air toward Vader with overwhelming heat. The street became a storm of fire. The heroes watching from behind immediately jumped back. That attack could melt steel. The flames roared closer, but Vader didn't move. He simply raised one hand. The fire struck an invisible barrier and stopped. The inferno twisted violently in midair, bending around an unseen force. The heat warped the air. The flames struggled, pushing harder, roaring louder. But they could not advance. Endeavor's eyes widened. What? The entire attack had been halted. With one hand, the fire slowly compressed, folded inward, then suddenly exploded outward in a harmless burst of sparks. The street fell silent. Endeavor lowered his arms slowly. For the first time in years, the number 2 hero felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. The armored figure finally spoke. His voice echoed cold and mechanical through the burning street. Your power is impressive. Vader lowered his hand. But primitive. The heroes behind Endeavor exchanged shocked glances. Endeavor's flames roared higher. Primitive? The ground cracked beneath his feet as his anger surged. You've got guts talking like that. He stepped forward again. Let's see if you can stop this. But before either of them could move, something shifted in the sky above Musutafu, high above the city. The strange tear in reality flickered again, and this time, it grew wider. The streets of Musutafu burned like a hellscape. Flames roared from shattered buildings. Twisted metal structures smoldered, and clouds of smoke billowed high into the night sky. Civilians had fled, leaving the city eerily empty, except for the heroes and the monstrous figure who had emerged from the shadows. At the center of the chaos stood Endeavor, flames coiling and writhing around his body like living serpents. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left the armored figure across the street. Vader's cape fluttered silently in the heat, untouched by the inferno that surrounded him. The mechanical hiss of his breathing cut through the crackling flames, a constant reminder of the presence before the hero. The two stared at each other, a silent understanding passing through the scorching air. This was no ordinary villain. Without warning, Endeavor surged forward. Fire lashed out in massive arcs, scorching the pavement and sending molten fragments into the air. He moved like a force of nature, relentless and merciless, determined to strike down the figure who had just annihilated an entire gang of villains. The pro-heroes who had followed from behind were frozen, staring in disbelief. The battle was happening too quickly, too violently. Impossible, muttered one hero. He's not using a quirk. Vader, calm and unyielding, tilted his head slightly. The heat of the flames hit him, yet he did not flinch. Instead, he extended one hand, and the fire froze midair, bending backward as if an invisible hand had twisted reality itself. Endeavor's face flickered with the first hint of uncertainty he had ever shown. He had faced countless villains, each more powerful than the last. Yet something about this man disturbed him deeply. Fire doesn't matter, Vader's voice echoed, deep and metallic, over the roar of the flames. Primitive, predictable. Endeavor's jaw tightened. Flames intensified, whips of fire stretching outward. Yet every surge met the same resistance, folded, bent, and controlled as if the air itself obeyed Vader's silent command. The heroes around them were flung backward as the force rippled through the street. Cars and debris lifted off the ground, spinning in midair before crashing to the pavement. Some tried to intervene, but they were tossed aside like rag dolls. Yet Endeavor refused to yield. With every ounce of willpower, every flicker of flame, he pressed forward, forcing Vader to react. It was the first time the armored figure's movements showed deliberate adaptation. He raised his hands to deflect the infernos with precise pushes of the force, redirecting the firestorms into harmless arcs of molten sparks. Your persistence is notable, Vader said, his voice almost contemplative, but insufficient. Endeavor's eyes burned hotter than the flames surrounding him. Insufficient? You think you can just crush this city and call it a challenge? His voice carried rage, determination, and a pride forged over decades. He surged again, the temperature around him rising to unbearable levels, melting the street beneath his boots. And then, almost ritualistically, Vader reached for the belt at his side. A hissing sound filled the battlefield as a single, crimson blade ignited with a brilliant hum. The light from the lightsaber cut through the smoke and fire like a blade through night itself. Time seemed to freeze. The heroes froze in place. Even Endeavor halted mid-stride, the flames around him flickering in stunned hesitation. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The city seemed to hold its breath. The wind stilled, smoke hung motionless, and even the distant sirens faded into silence. The red blade glowed, casting long, ominous shadows across the ruined street. Vader's figure became larger than life, every movement calculated, every gesture a promise of unmatched power. Endeavor stared, his flames dancing around him like a living barrier. His chest heaved, and for the first time, the number 2 hero felt the creeping weight of true uncertainty. Lightsaber, a hero whispered, voice trembling. What? What kind of quirk is that? It wasn't a quirk. It wasn't a weapon forged by this world. It was a tool of death, a manifestation of something far beyond comprehension. Vader tilted his head slightly, the red glow reflecting in his lenses. The force thrummed around him, resonating with the energy of the city's inhabitants, their quirks, and their fears. And then he stepped forward, one hand raised, the lightsaber humming with lethal elegance. The fire around Endeavor surged toward him, but for the first time, it was clear. This fight was no longer about hero versus villain. It was fire against the dark side. A voice cut through the battlefield. Vader's, low, deliberate, and final. Stand down, or be consumed. Endeavor's flames roared higher, defiance radiating from every molten tendril, yet a cold realization flickered in his eyes. He had never faced power like this. Above them, the skyline shivered as the tear in the sky pulsed faintly, as if reality itself was watching this clash of titans. And somewhere deep inside the city, a whisper of fear spread like wildfire. Something far greater than any villain Musutafu had ever faced had arrived. The world was about to change, and the clash had only just begun. The city streets of Musutafu had become a furnace. Smoke rose in thick black clouds, and the air shimmered with heat so intense it made every surface ripple. Flames danced across broken buildings, and the smell of burning metal mixed with the acrid stench of scorched asphalt. In the heart of the destruction, Endeavor and Darth Vader faced each other, two forces of raw power and sheer will. Flames whipped from Endeavor's body in spiraling infernos, scorching the street in front of him, while Vader's crimson lightsaber hummed, cutting the darkness with lethal precision. Every clash of fire and blade sent shockwaves through the city, shaking windows blocks away and drawing the eyes of terrified citizens. Impossible, a young hero murmured over the radio. Nothing we've seen can explain him. Not a quirk. Not anything. Hawks soared above, surveying the chaos. He flitted between the flames and debris, his feathers slicing the smoke as he tried to analyze the battlefield. We need to assist Endeavor, he shouted. But whatever that is, it's not normal. Even Best Genist and Kamui Woods arrived in the fray, using their precision and quirk mastery to manipulate the environment, attempting to provide openings for Endeavor. Threads wrapped around falling debris, while wooden structures rose to block flaming rubble. Yet every tactic, every coordinated strike, was met by Vader's unshakable presence. The armored Sith moved with terrifying calm, the force bending reality around him. He deflected streams of molten fire with effortless gestures, redirecting energy into harmless arcs. Every hero around him felt the invisible weight of his power. Objects lifted, spun, and slammed into the ground with devastating force. The city itself seemed to resist their presence. Endeavor's flames surged higher, every movement a desperate bid to push Vader back. Sweat and ash streaked his face, yet he pressed on. His mind raced with strategy. If raw power alone wasn't enough, Maybe overwhelming aggression would force a reaction. And it worked. Vader's movements began to shift subtly, his attacks slightly more deliberate, more careful. But as the battle escalated, something unexpected became clear. Vader's cybernetic body, powerful beyond comprehension, was beginning to struggle. Extreme heat from Endeavor's fire pressed against the armor, and for the first time, tiny sparks of vulnerability flickered across his frame. The Sith, so precise and controlled, now had to calculate, adjust, and respond. A sudden scream of wind tore through the streets. A pillar of fire erupted as Endeavor's flames collided with Vader's lightsaber in a violent clash. Sparks and embers shot into the sky like fireworks, illuminating the two titans locked in combat. Hawks let out a whistle from above. He's holding, but he's not unbreakable. Vader pivoted, thrusting his blade with a precision honed over decades of battle. The red light slashed through the air, slicing a flaming inferno in half. Every movement exuded a discipline that seemed almost alien to the heroes around him. His voice, cold and mechanical, cut through the roar of flames. Your power is impressive, but it will not save your world. Endeavor growled, flames surging higher as he pressed forward. I don't care what you are. This city will not fall while I'm alive. The battlefield shook as fire, psi, and force collided, throwing nearby cars into the air, shattering streets, and raining molten fragments on the surrounding buildings. Civilians hiding at a distance could only watch in terror as the impossible fight unfolded. The world, at this moment, had a new definition of danger. Then, without warning, the sound of thunder rolled across the city. It wasn't the clash of fire and metal. It was a deep, resonant voice that carried over the chaos. Every hero paused mid-action. Every villain who had survived fled in panic. A golden silhouette appeared on the horizon, towering over the streets. Light radiated from him, warm and unmistakable, a symbol that had inspired generations. The air seemed to hum with power, hope, and absolute authority. All might had arrived. The symbol of peace, whose name alone could calm entire cities, stood at the edge of the battlefield. His gaze swept over the destruction, landing on the fiery clash between Endeavor and Vader. A smirk, confident and unwavering, crossed his face. Endeavor, he called out, voice booming across the streets. I think it's time someone explained what real heroism looks like. The heroes on the ground froze. The villains trembled, and Vader, the unyielding force of the dark side, tilted his head, his mechanical breath steady but deliberate. For the first time, a ripple of calculation passed through him. The stage had shifted. The battle that shouldn't exist, a clash between a top pro hero and a Sith Lord, had now become a three-way spectacle. Every hero, every citizen, every eye in Musutafu was fixed on the impossible confrontation. And as all might stepped forward, the city seemed to hold its breath. The impossible fight had just become legendary. Above the ruins, Vader's lightsaber glowed brighter. His mechanical breathing grew heavier, deliberate, anticipating. He could sense the shift in power. This was no longer a mere skirmish. This was the beginning of a war that could reshape the entire world. And somewhere, in the shadows of the shattered skyline, a quiet, unmistakable thought formed in Vader's mind. Then, the symbol must fall. The firestorm around him intensified. The stage was set, and for the first time, Musutafu, and perhaps the world, truly understood the magnitude of the force that had arrived. The night air over Musutafu was heavy, charged with heat, smoke, and a palpable sense of dread. Flames still licked the streets, melting asphalt and sending sparks high into the sky. But now, the city seemed to pause, as if sensing the arrival of something far greater than any villain it had ever known. From the horizon, a golden silhouette appeared, radiating a warmth that cut through the chaos. Every hero on the streets, from hawks darting above to Kamui woods manipulating the rubble below, froze instinctively. It was a presence that demanded attention, not just respect, but absolute awe. All Might, the symbol of peace, had arrived. Vader turned slowly, his crimson lightsaber humming, casting ominous red light across the scorched streets. His mechanical breathing echoed unnervingly against the stillness that All Might brought with him. The Sith's eyes, hidden behind reflective lenses, fixed on the newcomer. There was no fear, only a calculating interest. The Force stirred violently, reacting to something it had never felt before. The energy emanating from All Might was immense, almost tangible, like a lineage of spirits compressed into a single, burning aura. Vader's grip on his lightsaber tightened slightly, and for the first time since arriving on this world, he hesitated. Something in the Force resonated with this being, not as a threat in the conventional sense, but as an equal, an anomaly. All Might's smile was calm, unwavering. He took a step forward, his immense presence filling the shattered street. Even the lingering villains and fleeing civilians instinctively paused, feeling the power emanating from him. "Young man," All Might's voice rolled like distant thunder, resonant, full of authority and warmth. "Are you the one threatening my city?" Vader's reply was slow, deliberate, and chillingly cold. "I am the one who will rule it." His mechanical voice carried across the battlefield, unyielding and precise, and yet underneath the menace, there was the faintest spark of curiosity, an acknowledgement of All Might's strength. The air seemed to thrum around them. The flames from Endeavor's earlier attacks warped, drawn toward the vortex of energy between the two figures. Hawks hovered tensely, feathers ruffling, while Kamui Wood's wooden constructs trembled as if the earth itself recognized the magnitude of the confrontation. Vader's cybernetic limbs adjusted subtly, sensors scanning, the Force flowing through him like never before. Yet All Might moved effortlessly, the energy from his body creating a protective aura that pulsed outward, stabilizing the surrounding environment. Even the fire that had once raged unchecked seemed to pause, bending subtly away from him. "You are strong," Vader admitted, his tone almost reverent, yet edged with the cold authority of a conqueror. "Stronger than I anticipated." All Might's smile widened, confident but calm. "Strength is not merely power. It is responsibility. It is to protect, not destroy. Do you understand that?" The words struck Vader differently than he expected. In a galaxy consumed by conquest and the rule of fear, he had never encountered someone whose power radiated hope rather than intimidation. Yet Vader's response was unwavering. "I understand only victory and dominance." A flicker of tension ran through the nearby heroes. Even Endeavor, flames still coiling around him, glanced at All Might with a mixture of relief and apprehension. This was a battle unlike anything he had faced, a confrontation between a living symbol and a force that could crush entire cities without thought. The Force surged again, reacting to All Might's presence. Vader's lightsaber hummed in resonance, the red blade casting long, menacing shadows across the broken streets. Sparks of energy seemed to jump between the two titans, a silent electric challenge that electrified the atmosphere. "All Might," Hawks whispered. voice barely audible above the crackling of distant flames. He's unlike any villain we've ever faced. And you're the only one who can stand. The symbol of peace took a deliberate step forward, fists clenched, energy radiating outward like a beacon. Vader mirrored the motion, hand tightening on his weapon, the force bending around him in anticipation. The ground itself shivered under the magnitude of their combined power, fissures cracking open the streets in jagged patterns. For a moment, silence fell, a fragile, tense pause, where the world itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, Vader's mechanical breathing deepened, deliberate, a harbinger of the storm to come. The first exchange was inevitable. The force, the power of one for all, and Vader's unmatched precision all converged in the silent promise of battle. And the city waited, trembling, as two legends prepared to collide. Above the smoke, a faint rumble hinted at something beyond even this confrontation, a lurking presence observing the clash of titans. One thing was certain: this was only the beginning. And in the eyes behind Vader's mask, the thought crystallized. The symbol must fall, for the galaxy to bend to my will. The world had never seen a confrontation like this, and soon it would never forget. The streets of Musutafu had become a battlefield unlike any seen before. Skyscrapers groaned under the weight of collapsing debris, their facades scorched by Endeavor's earlier flames, now illuminated by the red glow of Vader's lightsaber and the golden aura radiating from All Might. Dust and smoke whipped through the air, carrying the metallic tang of destruction as two of the universe's greatest forces prepared to collide. All Might's fist, powered by the immeasurable surge of One for All, slammed forward in a deafening Detroit smash, shaking the ground beneath. Yet Vader, standing perfectly still, let the attack meet an invisible barrier of telekinetic pressure. The street cracked under the impact, cars flung like paper, and yet Vader barely moved, his mechanical frame absorbing and redirecting the energy with surgical precision. The first exchange left both combatants at a standstill. All Might's face, usually confident and smiling, was now etched with focus. He had faced powerful villains, quirks that could level entire city blocks. But Vader was something entirely different. Not a quirk, not even a living opponent in the traditional sense. He was a machine, a master of the Force, and yet there was something organic beneath that cold metal shell. Something Vader himself had learned to mask, but which pulsed with raw life beneath the armor. Vader advanced, lightsaber sweeping with inhuman speed. All Might countered with a combination of precise punches and colossal jumps, each strike landing like a meteor upon the shattered streets. Sparks flew as blade met fist, energy clashing with raw strength, the sound echoing like rolling thunder through the city. Hawks and Kamui Woods hovered on the sidelines, their eyes wide, struggling to comprehend the scale of the confrontation. "I've never seen anything like this," Hawks murmured, feathers bristling. Despite his training, Vader found All Might's raw power challenging. Every swing of the hero's fist sent ripples through the Force, unpredictable and unrefined, yet devastating. Vader's defenses, honed over decades of war, were tested in ways he had never imagined. Each block, each parry, required him to adapt, to anticipate, to calculate in real time against a power fueled by both will and legacy. And yet, for all his raw strength, All Might struggled against Vader's subtle manipulations of the battlefield. Objects twisted unnaturally mid-air, telekinetic strikes launched from impossible angles, and debris seemed to animate itself at Vader's command. The hero had to dodge and counter in ways that defied conventional combat logic. Even his smiles and cheers felt strained, weighed down by the effort of matching a foe who wasn't bound by quirk or flesh. Then, in the midst of their clash, Vader sensed something extraordinary. A pulse beneath the hero's exterior, something transferable, one for all, the lineage of power compressed into all might, radiating not only strength, but potential. Vader's mind, disciplined by years of the dark side, recognized the value of such a force, a power he could harness, a key to shaping this world as he saw fit. The realization shifted the battle. Vader's strikes became sharper, less about destruction, and more about testing, probing, seeking an opening. Every parry he allowed, every counter he initiated, was now a study in extracting knowledge, measuring the limits of one for all. All Might, for his part, felt a chilling presence he could not fully understand. Not just Vader's mastery of the Force, but the calculated intent behind every movement. Each strike carried a weight of experience, of battles fought across galaxies, and yet he could not allow hesitation. Civilians were watching, heroes were counting on him, and the symbol of peace could not falter. The battlefield itself seemed alive, reacting to their conflict. Sparks ignited along fractured streets, winds whipped up in spirals, and the air vibrated with the combined intensity of two unstoppable forces. Every observer from the pro-heroes to the stunned onlookers felt it. This was no ordinary fight. This was legend against legend, an event that would ripple through the world's history. Then, for a brief, tense heartbeat, they stopped. Fists raised, lightsaber humming, bodies poised mid-motion. Vader's sensors flared, a single thought piercing his tactical mind. This power, it can be taken. All Might, chest heaving, golden aura blazing brighter than ever, stared into the mask of the Sith Lord. Even through the mechanical mask, he sensed Vader's intent, a desire for domination, a hunger for strength, a calculated ruthlessness unlike any villain he had ever faced. The moment shattered with a gust of energy as both launched simultaneously, collision imminent, the city trembling beneath their might. And in that instant, Vader whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "One for all, you will belong to me." The air crackled, the ground shook, and far above, in the shadows, someone or something watched. Something waiting for the right moment to strike, knowing this battle would soon draw out forces far greater than either combatant could imagine. The clash of legends had begun, and no one in Musutafu would ever be the same again. The battlefield lay in ruin. Smoke curled into the night sky like serpents, flames licking the sides of shattered buildings, casting the city in a flickering orange glow. Vader stood at the epicenter, his chest rising and falling mechanically, his lightsaber humming with ominous precision. All Might, battered but unbroken, had retreated momentarily to gather his strength, leaving the Sith Lord's attention momentarily unchallenged. Yet Vader's mind was elsewhere, not on victory, not on destruction, but on the strange, intangible force that had fueled the hero's power. One for all. Vader had faced countless powers, both natural and engineered, across galaxies. He had bent the Force to his will, absorbed entire legions into submission, and yet this was different. A quirk, yes, but not just any quirk. It was a legacy, a power passed down through generations, growing stronger with each successor, compacted into a single vessel of unimaginable potential. It resonated in a way the Force alone rarely did. A deep, layered energy, tied not to machinery, not to mere skill, but to the will of those who bore it. Vader's mechanical hand clenched. His dark breathing echoed across the hollow streets. He remembered the Sith tradition. Power preserved through lineage, through secrecy, through cunning. One for All mirrored that tradition perfectly. A force that could be nurtured, guided, shaped, and ultimately controlled. It was a key. And Vader intended to turn that key to unlock everything this new world had to offer. Meanwhile, far across Musutafu, the battle was being broadcast live. Students at UA High huddled around screens, faces pale with awe and terror. Midoriya, green hair tousled from hours of hero training, felt a prickling sensation run through him. Something was different. Something was stirring in the Force itself, brushing against him like a whisper he could barely comprehend. His fingers clenched into fists. He could feel it. An echo of the battle, a pull toward Vader, as though the dark figure knew something about him that no one else did. Hawks leaned closer to the monitor, eyes narrowing. That guy, he's not a normal villain. His power, there's no quirk behind it, yet he's reshaping the battlefield like it's nothing. Kamui Wood's arms flexed instinctively. And he's watching us. I can feel it. Back on the street, Vader's gaze shifted suddenly, unnervingly. The camera lens broadcasting the fight to the world seemed to draw his attention, though he did not need it. His black-clad silhouette turned toward the broadcast as though sensing the presence of a new variable, a new thread in the tapestry of power. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. "There is another," Vader whispered, his voice cold and metallic, carrying across the air in a low vibration that made the hairs on every pro-hero's neck stand on end. The words were not loud, yet they resonated with authority, with menace. In that instant, Midoriya froze. His heartbeat thumped like a drum in his ears. The Force, which he had never truly felt before, now pressed against him with a gentle yet insistent weight. He could sense it, a pull toward the dark figure thousands of kilometers away, a signal as ancient as the Sith themselves. Something in Vader's awareness had reached him. Midoriya's green eyes widened, realization dawning that this enemy, this dark specter, knew of his existence, and perhaps of his potential. All Might, though still recovering, noticed the subtle shift in Vader's stance. He recognized it, not as hesitation, but as calculation. The Sith Lord's focus had moved beyond brute strength, beyond citywide dominance. He was hunting a target, something essential, something personal. The city trembled around them as Vader stepped forward, lightsaber humming louder, slicing through the night air with a deadly grace. Smoke swirled around him, reflecting the red glow across jagged shards of concrete. Every movement, precise and deliberate, was a message to those watching. He was not done, not even close. As Vader surveyed the shattered streets, the Force flared subtly toward Midoriya's distant form, as though the dark power could feel the ripple of potential emanating from the boy. Midoriya swallowed hard, a shiver crawling down his spine. The battle was no longer only about All Might or the city. It was about the legacy, the power that could shape heroes and villains alike. And for a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to pause. Every camera, every eye, every hero felt it. The dark figure knew there was more to this universe than what met the eye. More than one vessel could carry power, and the Sith Lord's obsession had found its next clue. The whisper echoed again, carried across channels, airwaves, and screens, resonating with everyone who understood the gravity of it. There is another. Somewhere, in the quiet of a classroom, a green-haired boy clenched his fists, feeling the pull of a power he had only begun to understand. Somewhere else, Vader adjusted his stance, readying for a journey that would reach beyond the city, beyond the heroes, beyond the very world itself. The shadow of obsession had fallen, and One for All's secret was no longer safe. Musutafu would never be the same, and neither would the boy who held its future. Night had fallen over Musutafu, but the city was far from peaceful. Sirens wailed in the distance, a fractured symphony of chaos left in the wake of the earlier battle. Yet, somewhere in the shadows, a figure moved with absolute precision, gliding across rooftops and through alleyways with a presence that seemed to bend the air itself. Vader had returned, not to fight this time, but to observe, to hunt. A high loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly in the night, casting long, eerie reflections across the deserted streets. Vader paused, head tilting slightly. The Force had guided him here, whispering of potential, of latent power that could rival even the strongest of heroes he'd already faced. He could feel it, a spark buried deep, yet fierce and relentless. His gaze pierced the darkened campus as though the walls themselves could not hide it. Midoriya Izuku. The name echoed in Vader's mind like a bell tolling across the void. This boy, the current bearer of One for All. There was something in him, something that resonated with the essence of legacy Vader understood all too well. Not raw skill, not mere strength, but the inheritance of power, of hope, of responsibility. Vader's chest rose mechanically, breath steady but heavy with anticipation. A target had been chosen, but Vader was not alone. From the twisted alleyways, figures emerged from the shadows. The League of Villains, sensing an opportunity, had tracked the dark figure to the city's outskirts. Shigaraki Tamura stepped forward, eyes burning with ambition and madness. You're powerful. Join us. Together, we can crush UA, he hissed, hands twitching with decay. Vader turned slowly, each movement deliberate, precise. The crimson glow of his lightsaber was absent, but the hum of the Force radiated around him like a living entity. Shigaraki's offer hung in the air, fragile and naive, like a moth daring to flirt with a flame. Vader's response was silent at first, the pressure around him intensifying with every heartbeat, the air thickening as if gravity itself obeyed his will. Without warning, several League members were lifted into the air, their limbs flailing as the invisible Force tightened around their throats. Hawks and Kamui Woods, watching from a distance through binoculars, gasped at the sheer brutality of the display. Even Shigaraki's confident sneer faltered. What are you? Serve me, or perish, Vader intoned, his voice low, metallic, and merciless. The words carried a weight that crushed hope itself. The Force coiled around the villains, bending them to Vader's will, and the night was filled with the sound of strained bones and ragged gasps. One by one, the weaker members collapsed, their consciousness slipping away under the unrelenting grip of the dark power. Shigaraki staggered, feeling the invisible Force tug at him. The difference between him and Vader was a chasm, and he knew it instinctively. His quirk, once a symbol of terror and strength, now felt trivial against this ancient alien might. You can't, he stammered, the words dying on his lips. Vader's black-clad figure loomed over him, mask glinting faintly under the moonlight. His hand reached out, not with menace, but with the certainty of destiny. The city seemed to hold its breath. Not a single leaf rustled. Not a single neon sign flickered. Everything was still. The only sound was Vader's mechanical breathing, each inhalation a countdown to inevitability. He could sense it. The raw, latent potential in this world, centered on a boy who had yet to understand the true extent of his power. Vader's grip tightened slightly, enough to remind Shigaraki of his mortality without shattering him completely. The message was clear. Weakness would not be tolerated. Ambition alone was meaningless, and only through submission or death could one survive in the presence of ultimate power. In the shadows, Midoriya watched from afar, drawn by a strange tug he couldn't explain. The force, alien and incomprehensible, brushed against him once more, sending a shiver down his spine. He didn't yet understand the danger, only that a predator had set its sights on him, and that the predator was unlike any villain or hero he had ever known. Vader straightened, his attention already shifting back toward UA High. The boy who carried One for All was the key. All else, the League, the Chaos, the City, were merely obstacles, temporary distractions on a path that had only just begun. A new target had been chosen. And for those watching from the distance, whether heroes, students, or villains, a single, chilling thought pressed into their minds. The hunt had begun. Vader's final words lingered in the night, whispered as though carried by the wind itself, yet heavy with the inevitability of darkness. There is another, and I will find him. The city shivered under the promise of the Sith's obsession, and a storm was quietly forming, one that would change Musutafu forever. The morning sun barely pierced the smoke and rubble of Musutafu, yet the city was already alive with tension. News broadcasts looped the images of Vader's terrifying displays, the footage of heroes pushed to their limits, civilians caught between fire and telekinetic fury, and the League of Villains decimated by a single forceful hand. In every home, in every street, the same question lingered. Who or what was this dark figure? At UAD High, teachers gathered in hushed, urgent discussion. The battle that had seemed isolated the night before was now clearly a turning point. All Might had confronted Vader, yes, and the world had witnessed a spectacle that few could forget. But the murmurs of worry weren't just among educators. Government agencies, hero commissions, and even international security branches were mobilizing. Musutafu, Japan, perhaps even the entire Hero Society, was facing a threat the likes of which had never been seen before. Analysts scrolled through data feeds and satellite images, tracking Vader's movements, trying to understand his origin, his abilities, and, if possible, his weakness. Every scenario mapped seemed to shrink under the weight of the impossible. Reports compared him to known villains, to All for One, to nomadic Quirk users who had once shaken the world. But none fit. Vader was something else entirely, an entity from beyond, an apex predator with powers that bent reality itself. In a private chamber high above the city, All for One reclined in his seat, pale hands steepled, eyes glinting with dark amusement. News of Vader had reached him hours ago, and he had studied every detail, the rise, the tactics, the sheer dominance of the Dark Warrior. A smile curled across his lips, slow and deliberate, almost predatory. Another dark ruler, he murmured to himself, from another universe no less. Perhaps we should meet. The words lingered in the air, a promise of upheaval. for the first time in years, All for One felt genuine curiosity, a spark of excitement he had thought long dead. He envisioned the possibilities. Vader's mastery of a power beyond Quirks, his relentless discipline, his ruthless efficiency. What could two forces of darkness accomplish together? Or, perhaps, what could one learn from the other? The thought alone sent a shiver through the underworld of villainy. Back in Musutafu, the heroes were reacting in real time. Hawks darted through the skyline, reporting observations while coordinating with other pro-heroes. Best Jeanist and Kamui Woods were strategizing, recalibrating plans for city defense. But even their combined intelligence could not explain the anomaly that was Vader. His movements defied conventional logic. His attacks ignored the rules of quirk energy and physical limitation. Even the most seasoned heroes felt the creeping terror of power they had no precedent to measure. Among the students, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki watched the newsfeed on their devices. Midoriya's heart raced, an uncanny chill running down his spine. The whispers of the Force still brushed against him, faint but persistent, like a current beneath the surface of the world he thought he understood. Todoroki's gaze hardened, icy and calculating. This isn't just a villain, he muttered. He's different. Bakugo clenched his fists, eyes sharp and furious, the fiery energy within him matching the intensity of the broadcast. If he wants a fight, he'll get one, but I swear, he won't make it easy. And yet, for all the strategies being formed, for all the plans being whispered, the balance of the world had already begun to shift. Hero society was no longer in control. It was reacting, scrambling, adapting. The top heroes, the agencies, the students, they were all pieces on a board being redrawn by an unseen hand. Vader's presence had introduced a force too disruptive to ignore, one that could tip the scales of power irreversibly. In his command ship, Vader observed Musutafu through a viewport. The city spread out beneath him, vulnerable, ripe with potential. The Force hummed with activity, pulsing and resonating in response to the new lives he had sensed, the power he had glimpsed. One target stood out, the boy carrying One for All. He was the keystone, the spark that could either challenge or be added to Vader's growing dominion. All for One's smile widened across the world, a mirror to the Sith's cold certainty. Somewhere, two dark minds, two embodiments of power from different realities, were now aware of each other. And the world, heroes and villains alike, would never be the same again. The camera panned across the burning skyline, the city's lights flickering like stars swallowed by shadow. Somewhere, heroes clenched their fists. Somewhere, villains plotted. Somewhere, a boy wondered what it truly meant to inherit the power of generations. And in the shadows of destiny, a single, chilling phrase lingered. Perhaps we should meet. Musutafu held its breath, and the scales of balance began to tip. A shadowed chamber, far from prying eyes, deep within a skyscraper that trembled under the weight of Musutafu's chaos. Lightning streaked across the city outside, illuminating the silhouettes of two figures who seemed impossibly mismatched at first glance. One shrouded in black armor, breathing with mechanical precision. The other draped in an aura of unseen menace, his eyes calculating, his smile a blade. Darth Vader had arrived, silent, imposing, his presence bending the very air. Across from him, All for One lounged with practiced ease, a king surveying the potential of a new conquest. For a long moment, nothing moved, and yet the tension in the room was almost tangible, a taut wire stretched across worlds. Vader's mechanical respirator hissed rhythmically, echoing like the march of an unseen army, while All for One's eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Power, raw and undeniable, radiated from both of them. One had the discipline and mastery of a dark empire. The other had thrived by corrupting and consuming the power of others. It was a collision of two apex predators, each measuring the other, each sensing the depth of the threat they faced. All for One broke the silence first, his voice smooth, like silk stretched over steel. I must admit, your reputation precedes you, he said, stepping forward, his aura of authority pressing outward. Power like yours, unmatched in this world. It is wasted alone. Imagine it combined with my empire. Together, we could rule this world, and perhaps all worlds beyond. His grin widened, predatory and deliberate, as though dangling the promise of domination before Vader's stoic figure. Vader's gaze, beneath the black mask, never wavered. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his crimson blade, the force thrumming around him like a coiled storm. The Sith could feel All for One's power, a twisted symphony of stolen quirks, lives, and ambition. It resonated strangely, echoing the hunger he himself knew, the unrelenting desire to control, to dominate, to impose order through fear. And yet, there was something limiting. Quirks were fleeting. Powers borrowed from others were fragile. Vader's own mastery of the Force, tempered by years of loss and conquest, was absolute. All of that, Vader said, his voice deep, metallic, echoing like a drum of doom in the chamber, is irrelevant. There can only be one master. The words carried a weight that bent the air, a statement not of negotiation, but of inevitability. The Force pulsed violently, responding to the declaration. All for One, for the first time in decades, felt a ripple of hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. Here was not a man, nor merely a villain. This was a force beyond his comprehension. The chamber itself seemed to respond to the confrontation. Cracks appeared in the floor tiles as the force and the aura of All for One's power collided, static and tension hanging thick in the air. The hum of Vader's presence vibrated through the walls. Lights flickered and shadows twisted unnaturally, forming strange, momentary illusions of battles yet to come. Both men knew that even a single misstep could trigger an eruption that would consume the city outside. All for One's grin did not fade, but his voice sharpened. So be it, he said, his tone low, almost a growl. If you will not join me, then I will test the strength of this anomaly. Let us see if you truly are worthy of ruling over worlds. His quirk energy surged, coiling around him like a living storm, reaching out, probing, seeking weakness. Vader remained unmoved, his lightsaber humming as if it were a continuation of his own will. He felt the pull of the dark ambitions across the room. The power accumulated over countless lives and schemes, yet he knew his purpose was not to ally, but to dominate. The force tightened around him, a silent predator preparing to strike. Outside, the city remained oblivious to the storm brewing in secret. Heroes and villains alike watched the news feeds, felt the tremors of an unknown dread. Yet they could not comprehend the scale of what was happening. Above them, two masters of darkness, from entirely separate worlds, prepared to test the boundaries of power, strategy, and will. And then, without warning, All for One's energy flared violently, a warning and a challenge combined. The room seemed to contract around them, the air boiling with anticipation. Vader ignited his crimson blade, the first note of conflict ringing out in a symphony of destruction and inevitability. The chamber trembled. The world itself seemed to pause, as if waiting for the inevitable clash between two monsters whose ambition knew no bounds. And in that frozen heartbeat before war, a single thought resonated through the minds of both. One would rule, the other would fall. Outside, the city braced, unaware that a battle unlike any in history was about to begin. And for a fleeting moment, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The stage was set. The collision of legends was inevitable. And the first strike was coming. The room pulsed with tension, thick and suffocating, as Darth Vader and All for One stood mere meters apart. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, flickering with the dim light of scattered monitors and the glow of energy surging from All for One's hands. Two philosophies, two universes, two tyrants, colliding in a dance of intellect, ambition, and raw, unrelenting power. All for One spoke first, voice smooth and measured, each word carrying the weight of centuries of domination. Power, he said, gesturing at his own aura that twisted like living smoke, is not earned. It is taken, stolen, controlled. Only through the accumulation of other strength can one rise above mediocrity. His smile was razor sharp, a predator confident in the inevitability of his logic. This world, like all others, thrives on the weak bowing to the strong. I am the apex. You could be too, if you only accepted it. Vader's crimson blade hummed as he shifted, the force responding like a heartbeat reverberating through steel. Control is meaningless without power, he replied, low, deliberate. Strength is earned through mastery, through fear, through action. You rely on theft. I rely on dominance. His words cut through the air, charged with authority that felt palpable, almost physical. It wasn't just a debate. It was a duel of ideologies that threatened to warp reality itself. Across the city, far from this hidden chamber, young Izuku Midoriya sat in the UA dormitory, eyes glued to the live feed broadcasting the escalating crisis. The battle between these titans wasn't merely a spectacle. It resonated through the very veins of One for All. Midoriya's body trembled, a strange sensation crawling along his spine. The vestiges, the voices of those who had passed the quirk before him, stirred violently. Their whispers, usually distant, were sharp, urgent, almost fearful. That man, one of the vestiges murmured, a voice like a memory of wind through shattered glass, is drowning in darkness. Midoriya's breath hitched. He could feel it. Not just Vader's power, but his intent, his philosophy, the cold certainty that underpinned every calculated action. The force radiated from the Sith like ripples across water, tugging at the vestiges inside him. They stirred in warning, their collective voices trembling with a mixture of awe and dread. Something was awakening, something ancient that predated the world he knew. Back in the chamber, the philosophical duel intensified. All for One's form seemed to shimmer with each argument, as if the very air bent to his conviction. You see fear as the ultimate weapon, he said, circling Vader, voice like silk over steel. But fear is fleeting. Quirks, they endure. They propagate. One day, even your mastery of the Force will pale before the ingenuity of those who inherit power from me. Vader's respirator hissed louder, an echo of his irritation, though his movements remained controlled, precise. He extended a gloved hand subtly, manipulating the Force like a conductor commanding a symphony. Your arrogance blinds you. Power taken is fragile. Strength forged is eternal. And when the galaxy bends to me, it is not because they obeyed me. They feared me. The room vibrated with invisible pressure, the force pressing outward like the weight of 1,000 storms. And All for One's grin faltered for the briefest of moments. The ideological war was more than words. Objects shifted violently around the chamber. Furniture lifted. Sparks of stolen quirks clashed with invisible force currents. The energy displaced by their philosophies was visible now, arcing and crackling like lightning. A storm contained in 4 walls. Both men knew this was not a prelude. It was a war in itself. Meanwhile, Midoriya's vision blurred. Scenes flashing before his eyes. Vader moving through the shadows, bending objects with unseen strength, quelling life with the Force. He felt the vestiges writhing inside him, warning, reacting. He's different, one whispered. Fear and awe mingled, not like the others, not like All for One. He's a darkness we cannot fully grasp. A sudden surge of force energy radiated through the monitors, and Midoriya staggered back. His heart pounded. The vestiges screamed in warning, a chorus of caution he had never heard before. He's coming. He knows, they said, a chilling synchronicity with Vader's thoughts, as if the Sith's focus had reached across dimensions to touch him. The philosophical standoff reached a crescendo. Each word, each motion, a test of will, a measurement of dominance. The 2 Dark Masters circled, not merely sizing each other up physically, but probing weaknesses, challenging beliefs, daring the other to falter. And as Vader's crimson blade hummed, All for One's aura flared, the room flickering under the strain of 2 conflicting universes' power. In that moment, the air thickened with anticipation. Not a battle of fists or quirks, but of ideologies that would shape the world. And yet, in the chaos, a single realization hung in the air. The world was about to be changed forever. And Midoriya, feeling the vestiges writhe violently inside him, knew one truth with chilling clarity. The darkness was watching him. It was not just a battle of monsters anymore. It was a war for the very soul of heroes. The city lay in uneasy quiet, the aftermath of clashing titans lingering like smoke in the air. Skyscrapers bore scars from collisions of power that had shaken the very foundations of UA and its surroundings. Amidst the chaos, one shadow moved with silent purpose. Darth Vader. His presence was a ripple through the world, subtle yet impossible to ignore. The streets felt colder where he passed, the wind whispering with the cadence of the Force, brushing against every living thing as if acknowledging his authority. Izuku Midoriya crouched behind a shattered wall, eyes wide, pulse hammering in his chest. The boy had seen enough today to understand the magnitude of what he faced, yet the figure now approaching him alone made the world feel smaller, more intimate, more terrifying. Vader's mechanical breathing punctuated the stillness, each hiss a drumbeat of inevitability. Every step Vader took seemed to compress the air, bending shadows toward him as though the darkness itself were alive. "You have potential," Vader said, voice deep and resonant, reaching across the distance between them like a tangible hand. A power untested, untamed, much like I once sensed in another. His gaze, obscured by the dark mask, carried an intensity that pried at the edges of Midoriya's consciousness. The Force flowed through him, not violently as it had in battle, but with a subtle insistence that seemed to pull directly at Midoriya's quirk, at the very core of One for All. Midoriya's fingers trembled. The vestiges stirred violently inside him, murmuring warnings he could barely comprehend. Each voice was a whisper, fragmented and urgent. He's different. Not like All for One. Darkness approaching. Vader stepped closer, the shadow of his towering figure stretching across the debris-strewn pavement. You've been trained to be a hero, to obey rules, to serve ideals that will limit you, he continued. His tone almost persuasive, seductive in its calm. But you could be so much more. Abandon your society. Learn the true extent of your power. Rule alongside me, and your potential will know no bounds. Midoriya's chest tightened. The words were simple, almost gentle, but they resonated with a strange clarity that his rational mind could not dismiss. The Force seemed to entwine with One for All, whispering promises of limitless strength, of freedom from the burdens of responsibility. He could feel the pull, not coercion, not force, but an alluring suggestion that the path of darkness was not only possible, but desirable. A gust of wind rattled the remnants of broken glass around them, shimmering as if the air itself were charged. Midoriya's mind raced. Images flickered, visions of a world where he was no longer constrained by rules, no longer bound to be a symbol or a protector. In these visions, the darkness offered him clarity, focus, and power unlike anything he had ever wielded. The temptation was suffocating. Yet, beneath it all, the voices of the vestiges screamed. "No!" they cried. "You are a hero! Do not succumb!" Their collective panic clashed with Vader's calm certainty, a storm inside Midoriya that left him shaking, torn between instinct and desire, duty and temptation. Vader extended a gloved hand, the Force radiating outward, gentle yet inexorable. "I can teach you," he said. "I can guide you to control what you cannot yet imagine. Together, we could reshape this world. One force, one power, one purpose." His words were an offer of salvation and dominion intertwined. The dark air around him shimmered, a promise of power that seemed to hum directly to Midoriya's heart. Midoriya's vision blurred, one vestige whispering with a tremor of fear. "He knows. He feels you, the boy who carries the power of many. The darkness seeks to claim you before you are ready." The boy's hands clenched into fists, heart hammering in synchrony with Vader's mechanical breath. For the first time, he understood the weight of true temptation, the call of power that bypassed morality, logic, and caution. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The Force seemed to lean toward him, the shadows pressing closer, whispering possibilities he had never dared consider. And in that moment, the question that would define him loomed like a knife poised above his heart. Could he resist? Or would the pull of darkness claim him first? The wind howled around the broken streets as Midoriya lifted his gaze, locking eyes with the dark figure before him. Vader's presence was absolute, unyielding, and intoxicating, and for a heartbeat, the world itself seemed to pause. Then, the smallest sound, a distant siren, a crackle of television static, reminded him of what he was fighting for. But the pull remained, heavy, relentless, unforgiving. The boy's next choice would not just define him. It would define the future of the entire hero society. And in the shadows, Vader's red lightsaber ignited with a hiss, painting the city in the color of temptation, a promise of power that Midoriya could neither ignore nor fully resist. The stage was set. The first true battle for Midoriya's soul had begun. The darkness waited patiently, knowing that all heroes eventually face the moment when they must choose, and that even the strongest hearts can waver. The early morning sky above UA trembled with the distant roar of chaos. Smoke curled from shattered streets, the acrid scent of burning concrete mingling with ozone and the metallic tang of blood. From the horizon, a dark horde approached, the League of Villains, their faces twisted in anticipation of destruction. The students and teachers braced, forming defensive lines, but even seasoned heroes felt the prickling unease of facing a threat that seemed larger than life. Then, a shadow detached itself from the smoke. Tall, imposing, mechanical breathing, echoing over the battlefield. Darth Vader appeared, stepping through the haze as if the world itself parted for him. He did not come as a hero. He did not come as an ally. He came as judgment incarnate. The League charged, screaming their defiance, their quirks flaring with reckless abandon. But Vader's presence was a silent eclipse of authority. A flick of his gloved hand sent a telekinetic wave through the front lines. Villains lifted off their feet, thrown into walls and rubble, their attacks interrupted before they could reach the heroes. The ground shivered beneath the force of his power. "Enough!" Vader's voice boomed, the mechanical rasp carrying weight that silenced even the fiercest cries. Weakness is intolerable. With ruthless precision, he began eliminating the villains who dared oppose him. Machinations of quirk and fury collided with the disciplined, ancient power of the Force. One moment, Toga lunged with lethal intent, only to be caught midair by invisible hands, slammed into a broken pillar. Twice, thrice, she tried again, each attempt broken before it could land. Kurogiri's warp fields flickered under Vader's scrutiny, the Sith's control over the Force bending reality in a way no portal could resist. The battlefield became a tempest of movement, heroes dashing forward, villains striking back, and Vader moving through it all like a dark tide, unrelenting and implacable. His lightsaber ignited, carved arcs of crimson through the air, not indiscriminately, but with surgical intent. Each swing, each forced push, each step he took reminded the world that this was not a being to bargain with. This was inevitability made flesh. Amid the chaos, All Might stood atop a crumbling wall, watching the carnage unfold. Even he, the symbol of peace, felt the chill of unease. Vader's intervention was neither heroic nor honorable. It was terrifyingly absolute. And yet, for the first time in his career, All Might realized that even villains might die without the world's eyes noticing. And maybe the heroes themselves would have to question what kind of power this represented. The League of Villains faltered under the Sith's dominance, and their leader Shigaraki felt the icy grip of fear for the first time. Vader's presence was not just physical, it was psychological. The weight of judgment pressed on him, and then Vader's gaze turned directly towards Shigaraki. A wave of the Force lifted the League, tossing them like ragdolls. Shigaraki's body hung in midair, fingers clawing the air in desperation. "Serve me or perish," Vader intoned, each word a threat that carried across both space and spirit. Shigaraki's mind raced, realizing that his schemes, his alliances, his control over the villains, all of it meant nothing to this being. And then, from the edge of the battlefield, a presence darker and more oppressive than Vader's own began to emerge. A whisper of movement across shattered glass and debris signaled the arrival of someone else. All for One had arrived. The ground seemed to shiver under his presence, as if the air itself recognized a force capable of rivaling the Sith. All for One's gaze swept across the chaos, noting the precision, the dominance, the absolute lethality of Vader's intervention. A smirk tugged at his lips, a dangerous, knowing curve. Here, in this battlefield of broken heroes and defeated villains, he saw opportunity. The two greatest threats the world had seen, or would ever see, were now in the same space. And the thought of what could come from their collision sent a thrill through him that was almost palpable. Vader's mechanical breath cut through the tension, the scarlet glow of his lightsaber painting the battlefield with a warning. He moved with intent, a predator analyzing prey, unconcerned with alliances or morals. Every hero and villain within reach understood instinctively that his actions were not protection. They were selection. And as the first meeting of these two titans drew near, the heroes of UA watched, hearts pounding, unsure whether to fight, flee, or pray. The stage had shifted. The breaking point was here, and nothing in their world, or any world, would remain the same. Somewhere in the shadows, All for One's voice slithered like smoke. Perhaps this is the beginning of true chaos. The battlefield waited with bated breath for the next strike, the next collision, the next move that would decide the fate of heroes, villains, and the very balance of power in this universe. And above it all, Vader's lightsaber ignited again, a crimson warning that the reckoning had only just begun. The storm was coming, and no one would survive it unchanged. The city shook. Skyscrapers shivered as if frightened, their glass facades rattling against the shockwaves rippling outward from UA District. The sky, once pale blue, had turned to ash, streaked with smoke and the afterglow of energy blasts colliding with metal and stone. On the battlefield below, two figures moved like avatars of apocalypse. Darth Vader, a towering silhouette of black and red, his every step echoing with mechanical inevitability. And All for One, a monstrous mass of humanity and stolen quirks, shifting and writhing with power too immense to quantify. The first clash was instantaneous. Vader's lightsaber ignited, a blade of crimson that hummed through the air, cutting arcs of terror. All for One countered with telekinetic flurries of stolen abilities, explosions, blades, restraints, every quirk imaginable launched at once, a chaotic symphony of destruction. Even the most experienced heroes, watching from the rooftops, felt the crushing intensity of this collision. All Might's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing that these were forces beyond anything he had faced. Vader advanced with deliberate precision, each movement measured, calculated, unstoppable. Force pushes shattered walls and flung debris, a storm of telekinesis against telekinesis. All for One adapted, morphing his body in response, intercepting blasts with 100 stolen quirks, twisting reality with his uncanny versatility. The city became a living battlefield, a testament to the sheer scale of power that two ultimate tyrants could unleash. But then, All for One's eyes glimmered with a dark idea. His fingers extended, his body stretching unnaturally, and he attempted the unthinkable, a quirk that no human or Sith should ever resist. He reached not for flesh, not for mind, but for the essence of the Force itself. Streams of stolen power coalesced, writhing and bending, reaching toward Vader's very connection to the Force. Vader felt it, a tugging at his core, subtle at first, then violent, as though the universe itself was straining under the weight of this attempt. He staggered, not from weakness, but from recognition. No mortal or quirked being had ever tried to touch the Force directly. The air shimmered, charged with tension so thick it could be sliced with a lightsaber. Vader's mechanical breathing grew louder, each exhale a warning, each step a statement of inevitability. You dare Reach for what is beyond you. Vader's voice, low and resonant, carried across the battlefield, silencing explosions and screams alike. The Force responded, flaring like a storm in miniature, wrapping around him as he countered All for One's unprecedented attack. Sparks flew, debris twisted into tornadoes, and the very ground convulsed as the two powers struggled for dominance. Heroes tried to intervene. Midoriya launched forward, one for all blazing with energy, only to be held back by the tidal wave of force and Quirk interlocking. Bakugo exploded toward All for One, trying to add his own fire to the storm, but was hurled back by an invisible hand, landing amid rubble, coughing and wide-eyed. Even Endeavor, flames raging higher than the smoke above, recognized the futility of direct confrontation. This was a war between kings. Mortal champions could not tip the scales. And then All for One smiled, a cruel, knowing curve of his lips. You think your power is absolute, Sith? You are nothing compared to the accumulation of centuries of stolen strength. Vader's response was silent, a shift in the Force, subtle but palpable, and the ground quaked beneath All for One. The quirks he wielded, dozens, hundreds, began to resist him, as if acknowledging the primal authority of the Sith. Vader advanced, lightsaber slicing through the air, each strike pushing All for One further back, testing his defenses, measuring his limits. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Buildings bent but did not fall. Vehicles twisted in midair and froze. Civilians were evacuated, but could see from a distance the impossible scale of this duel. Two forces of darkness, one from another galaxy, one born from the world of Quirks, colliding with the Earth as their battlefield. Then, the moment of revelation. All for One's attempt to steal the Force had failed, but not without consequence. Vader's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, but the ground beneath him had cracked, streets torn asunder, energy pulsing outward like a heartbeat of war. The balance had shifted. All for One was still standing, but now, he realized, he faced a being who could not be manipulated, could not be bargained with, could not be stolen from. And yet, his grin widened. Even defeat, in some way, inspired new schemes. He had glimpsed a power beyond mortal comprehension, a power he might someday seize. But that day was not today. Today he fought, and he would not yield. Vader ignited the full intensity of the Force around him, telekinetic storms swirling, lightsaber blazing, and prepared to strike again. All for One braced, collecting stolen quirks, ready for the counter. The War of Dark Kings had begun in earnest, and somewhere, in the shadows beyond the city, eyes watched, waiting for the outcome. The world trembled, the heroes held their breath, and the villains, weak and strong alike, realized that the scale of power they had unleashed was beyond comprehension. And then, a sudden, piercing sound split the sky, an arrival no one expected, cutting through the chaos like a blade of pure anticipation. The battle was far from over, and the next move could change everything. The city groaned beneath them. Streets cracked, buildings splintered, and the very air seemed to vibrate with a tension no one had ever felt. The battle between Darth Vader and All for One had escalated beyond mere combat. It was a collision of universes, a tearing of reality itself. Sparks of Quirk energy danced like lightning across the sky, mingling with the dark currents of the Force. Every explosion, every Force push, sent ripples across the battlefield, warping space, bending time, and twisting the city into a nightmarish tableau of chaos. From the rooftop, heroes watched, their hearts pounding. Endeavor's flames licked the sky as he restrained himself from rushing in, his mind calculating the impossible. Even All Might, the symbol of peace, felt the weight of insignificance pressing down. This was not a fight for victory. This was a test of survival, for the city, for the heroes, for the very fabric of existence. Below, Midoriya stumbled forward, one for all pulsing within him, reacting violently to the surge of dark energy. The vestiges of previous wielders whispered urgently, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and warning. The darkness, it calls to you. Be ready. The ground beneath his feet trembled as a wave of force energy slammed into All for One's defenses. Vader moved with terrifying grace, his crimson lightsaber slicing through the air, leaving arcs of destruction in its wake. All for One countered, reshaping his body, redirecting stolen quirks, but the strain showed. The man who had once controlled hundreds of abilities now struggled against a power that was older than any quirk, a power rooted in the Force itself. Then Vader paused, his mechanical breathing filling the fractured silence like a drumbeat of doom. He turned his gaze toward Midoriya, eyes, hidden though they were, burning with intensity. "You were meant to replace me," he said. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of inevitability. A tremor ran through the young hero's chest. One for All flared violently, as though recognizing a new direction, a new destiny opening before him. Midoriya's heart raced. The temptation was palpable. He could feel the pull of the dark side, the promise of strength beyond imagination, the allure of control over a world teetering on the edge. And yet at the same time, the faces of his friends, of his mentors, flashed in his mind. Uravity's determination, Bakugo's fiery challenge, All Might's enduring smile, anchors pulling him back to the path of heroism. Around them, the battlefield continued to fracture. Buildings bent unnaturally as Vader used the Force to hurl debris with surgical precision. All for One retaliated with a storm of quirks, shields, blasts, binding restraints, but the Force twisted them mid-flight, shattering his control. The ground cracked and heaved, rivers of molten asphalt carving new patterns across the cityscape. Civilians had been evacuated, but the remnants of the chaos painted a picture of apocalypse for anyone watching from afar. Midoriya stepped closer, hands trembling, one for all flaring brighter than ever. The vestiges whispered warnings, each echo layering over the other. Do not let him take you. Fight him. You are the next symbol. Their urgency mirrored his own rising pulse. Vader's words lingered like smoke in the air, a promise of power, a test of will. Suddenly, All for One's attention snapped toward the boy. His eyes, gleaming with a malevolent curiosity, focused on Midoriya, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The stolen quirks around him surged, twisting and writhing, reaching for the young hero like grasping hands. He intended to corrupt or destroy the boy. He could not allow another master of One for All to rise in the midst of his chaos. Vader stepped forward, lightsaber slicing through the charged air, his presence a wall of dark inevitability between All for One and Midoriya. "Step aside," Vader said, his tone both command and promise, "or you will fall." Midoriya's eyes widened. This was more than a battle. This was a crucible, a choice. The energy of the Force and One for All intermingled around him, tugging, testing, reshaping his very being. Every instinct screamed to retreat. Every fiber of his hero's heart urged him to fight. And yet, Vader's presence whispered a different path, one of unprecedented strength, one that could save the city or destroy it entirely. And then it happened. A tremor unlike any before shattered the battlefield, ripping open the air with a deafening roar. Energy surged outward, bending reality, and the city seemed to hang in a fragile balance between existence and annihilation. Midoriya felt the pull again, stronger than ever. Vader's gaze locked onto his, unwavering, and a single phrase cut through the chaos. "You were meant to replace me." The words echoed in Midoriya's mind as the fabric of the city twisted and warped around him. Time slowed. The choice was here. The weight of destiny pressed down, heavier than steel, more binding than chains. The young hero's next move would not only determine the outcome of this battle, it could decide the fate of an entire world. And from the shadows, All for One's grin widened, sensing the fracture in the boy's resolve, ready to exploit it. The cataclysm had begun, and Midoriya's decision was about to ignite the next stage of this war. The battlefield lay in ruins, a jagged scar across the city. Smoke and dust swirled like phantom currents around shattered skyscrapers. Energy from the clash of Darth Vader and All for One had left the very air crackling, and Midoriya felt it deep in his bones. The Force and One for All intertwined here, bleeding into each other in ways no one had ever imagined. It was a dangerous resonance, chaotic and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful. Midoriya's eyes burned with determination. The vestiges of One for All whispered frantically, yet there was a new tone now, a harmony threading through the chaos. "This is it," one murmured. "The boy, he can reach him." Another added, "Compassion, that is the path." The young hero inhaled sharply, centering himself amidst the hurricane of destruction. Every instinct screamed at him to strike with full force, to end Vader the way the world might expect. But One for All, in resonance with the Force, urged a different way, an understanding that raw power alone could not win this battle. From across the war-torn streets, Vader watched him. The mechanical breathing was a steady, menacing rhythm beneath the roar of collapsing buildings. Yet there was something different in his stance now, a recognition, a hesitation. Midoriya stepped forward, fists glowing with the brilliant green-blue aura of One for All at its peak. Around him the wind shifted, reacting to the pulse of the Force, lifting debris like a tide, bending the battlefield to his presence. Vader ignited his crimson lightsaber with a snap hiss, and it cut through the smoky air, a warning and a challenge. "You have grown stronger than I anticipated," he said, voice modulated and dark. "But strength without purpose is meaningless." Midoriya did not answer with anger. He did not lash out with the fury of a desperate world. Instead, he extended his hand, not to strike, but to connect. The One for All energy surged, merging with the Force around him. The air shimmered with potential, a radiant thread linking the boy to the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker. "I'm not here to fight you," Midoriya said, voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm here to reach you." For the first time, Vader paused. The Force tugged at him, tugged at something buried deep beneath the armor, beneath the hate and the pain. Memories long buried, faint echoes of Anakin Skywalker, flickered at the edges of his consciousness. Midoriya felt it, not just as intuition, but as a tangible presence within the dark energy surrounding the Sith Lord. Compassion, courage, and hope radiated from the boy, brushing against the cracks in Vader's armor, both literal and figurative. The two circled each other, not with swords or fists, but with energy, with purpose. Midoriya's aura pulsed brighter, one for all, and the Force dancing in tandem. Debris swirled around him, suspended by sheer will, forming a chaotic halo that glimmered with latent potential. Vader mirrored the motion, cutting arcs through the air with precise swings, the Force bending the wreckage around him as if to protect him from this pull that threatened to overwhelm him. "You're different," Vader finally admitted, his voice betraying the smallest crack of doubt. "I have not felt this in a long time." Midoriya's green eyes locked with the blackened mask. "It's not too late," he said softly. "You don't have to be the monster everyone fears. You were someone else once. You can be that again." The Force responded to the words. It surged, not in violent pulses or crushing blows, but in harmony. Vader's hand twitched, caught between reaching for his saber and reaching for something more. A ghostly light flickered behind the mask, the barest hint of Anakin's face, if only for an instant. And in that moment, Midoriya understood. This was not a battle to destroy, but a chance to redeem. To save not just the world, but the man within the armor. All around them, the battlefield stilled slightly, as if even the city itself sensed the shift. Heroes held their breath. Villains hesitated. The war had frozen for a heartbeat, giving Midoriya the chance to become more than a symbol. He let the energy flow through him, one for all, amplifying the resonance of the Force. Every step he took radiated purpose. Every movement was a message. There is hope. Vader's lightsaber wavered. The mechanical breathing remained, but there was a pause, a question lingering in the darkness. And for a fleeting, impossible instant, Anakin Skywalker's eyes, alive with humanity, looked out from behind the mask. The moment was fragile, unstable, yet undeniable. Midoriya's heart pounded, and he knew the next action would determine everything. Would the darkness yield to the light, or would the weight of the past drag both the boy and the galaxy into ruin? Somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope flickered, a hope that could change the course of this world. And as Midoriya stepped closer, lights blazing, and the Force resonating with his quirk, the air itself seemed to whisper. The rise of a new hope had begun. The air above the battlefield vibrated with a tension that felt almost alive. Smoke and debris spiraled from the clashes of the past hours, but at the center of the chaos, time seemed to slow. Darth Vader hovered above the cracked concrete, lightsaber humming with lethal precision, his mask reflecting the fires of a city on the brink of collapse. Midoriya crouched nearby, one for all blazing at its limit, the energy of the Force wrapping around him like a protective cocoon. Every nerve in Vader's body screamed at him, destroy the boy, end this threat before it grows. But something deeper, buried beneath decades of rage and obedience, whispered otherwise. The echoes of the past pressed upon him. Memories of another son, another boy he once loved, flickered through the machine of his mind. Luke, Anakin, a choice made long ago, one that had haunted him across galaxies, resurfacing now in a new world, a new child. The Force whispered to him, not as a weapon, but as a plea. And Midoriya. Midoriya stood not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with compassion that cut through Vader's darkness like sunlight through a storm. All might cannot save him. All for One's voice boomed, a monstrous echo amplified by stolen quirks. The villain's hand extended, tendrils of stolen energy writhing, aiming directly for Midoriya. The boy's aura flared, the air around him shimmering, yet he did not retaliate with aggression. He was a beacon, drawing Vader's attention, challenging him in ways words could not. And then it happened. Vader's mechanical breathing shifted, sharper, heavier, almost a growl of decision. In a moment that would echo across both worlds, the Sith raised his hand, not at Midoriya, but at All for One. The crimson blade of his saber slashed through the tendrils of Quirk energy before they could touch the boy, cutting them cleanly in half. Sparks and stolen powers scattered into the wind, fizzing and dying like dying stars. The villain's eyes widened behind his mask. "You cannot win," Vader said, voice calm yet absolute, carrying the weight of inevitability. The Force surged around him, and with a powerful push, he threw All for One backward. Buildings trembled, glass shattered, and the ground quaked under the shockwave. Even All Might stumbled, bracing against the tremor, realizing the scale of what had just occurred. The very air seemed to bend to Vader's will, as if the Force itself had chosen its course. Midoriya's eyes met Vader's through the haze of destruction. No fear, no anger, just trust. And something fragile, almost impossible, began to bloom in Vader's chest. A recognition that the boy's compassion mirrored the man he once was. It was a dangerous feeling, a fissure in decades of darkness, but it was real. All for One roared in fury, recalibrating, summoning a dozen stolen quirks at once, launching them in a swirling barrage toward both of them. But Vader moved with the precision of a predator and the calm of a master. Each strike of his lightsaber intercepted, each movement guided by both the Force and his own decades of battle experience. Yet this time, he was not fighting to dominate, not to impose fear. He was fighting to protect. "You remind me of him," Vader murmured, almost to himself, the breath of the mask catching faintly in the wind. "I will not fail again." The city seemed to hold its breath as the two Dark Kings clashed, but now Vader's focus was singular. He was not the enemy of this world, not yet. His power, terrifying as it was, now served as a shield rather than a weapon of domination. And for a moment, the impossible seemed possible. The Sith Lord, feared across galaxies, had chosen redemption over destruction. All for One's fury escalated, but the advantage had shifted. Midoriya surged forward, drawing from the resonance of One for All and the Force. His presence bolstered Vader's resolve, reminding him that strength could coexist with mercy. The stolen quirks faltered against the combined will of two determined hearts, and All for One's confidence wavered for the first time. Vader struck with relentless precision, each movement deliberate, each swing a testament to a choice decades in the making. The Force and One for All intertwined around him, amplifying his strikes. Yet there was restraint, control. He was no longer the instrument of fear. He was a guardian, protecting the boy who had reminded him of the man he once was. And in the final, shattering beat of this moment, All for One stumbled, energy drained, quirks faltering under the onslaught. Vader's lightsaber hovered at the ready, poised above the fallen tyrant. The silence that followed was deafening, a fragile pause in a city scarred by chaos. Midoriya breathed heavily beside him, eyes wide but steady. The Force whispered, One for All hummed, and for the first time in decades, Darth Vader stood not as a conqueror, but as a protector. And somewhere deep inside, the man beneath the mask felt it, the weight of his past lifting, even if only slightly, as the fall of the Sith began. But the battle was not over. a lingering shadow of darkness remained, and the city, the heroes, and the Force itself all waited with bated breath for what would come next. The choice had been made, but the consequences were yet to be revealed. The sky above UA High burned with the remnants of the earlier battles. Smoke twisted like restless spirits, and the city trembled from the sheer force of the clashes that had reshaped reality itself. In the heart of the devastation, two figures faced each other amidst the rubble, Darth Vader and All for One. The air crackled with energy, a maelstrom of stolen quirks clashing with the dark currents of the Force. Every corner of the battlefield bore the scars of their war, and yet, in the midst of chaos, a tense silence settled, both titans poised for the final confrontation. Vader's crimson lightsaber ignited with a hum that cut through the din, steady and absolute. The Force surged around him, a living presence that rippled outward, bending debris, scattering rubble, and unsettling the very fabric of the air. All for One, ever the master of stolen power, smirked behind his mask of arrogance. Hundreds of quirks, swirling like a dark storm around him. Hungry, chaotic, untamed, the clash had escalated beyond anything heroes or villains had imagined. This was no longer a battle. It was a collision of world-shaping forces. From the shadows, the heroes watched. Midoriya's chest heaved, One for All glowing faintly, as if sensing the magnitude of the choice that was about to unfold. Bakugo clenched his fists, eyes sharp, every muscle tense. Even All Might, bruised and battered from earlier interventions, felt the weight of history pressing down. None could move forward. None could interfere. This was Vader's battle, and the city itself seemed to recognize it. Vader stepped forward, his movements deliberate, measured. The Force coursed through him, brighter, more violent than ever before. He did not hesitate. He could feel the energy of the young hero at his side, Midoriya, calling out silently, "Trust." And in that call, Vader found clarity. All for One lunged, a flurry of stolen quirks launching toward Vader with devastating intent. But the Sith Lord was faster than thought, faster than imagination. His lightsaber met the chaos head-on, slashing through quirk after quirk, each strike precise, each movement guided by decades of battle experience. Yet this was no ordinary fight. With every motion, Vader poured himself into the Force, channeling the full depth of its power, not for domination, but for destruction of the greater evil. The ground shuddered as energy collided with energy. Buildings groaned and splintered, and the sky above swirled with unnatural winds, debris spinning like miniature tornadoes. The heroes shielded their eyes, hearts pounding as they witnessed the impossible. The Sith Lord feared across galaxies, sacrificing every ounce of himself to protect a world not his own. All for One laughed, a twisted sound that seemed to shake even the Force itself. "You would die for them? How pathetic," he hissed, hurling more quirks at the relentless figure before him. But Vader did not waver. He raised both hands, summoning the Force with absolute mastery. A brilliant surge of energy erupted from him, enveloping All for One in a maelstrom of light and darkness intertwined. The quirks, no matter how powerful, could not withstand it. They twisted, burned, and shattered under the weight of sheer will. Midoriya watched, wide-eyed, as Vader's figure became almost ethereal in the radiance of the Force. Every strike was an act of finality, every motion a declaration. Vader's breathing, harsh and mechanical, echoed through the streets, a metronome marking the inevitable end. And then, at the climax, Vader drove the Force directly into All for One. A blinding explosion of energy erupted, shattering windows, cracking streets, and sending a shockwave that lifted heroes and villains alike from their feet. When the dust settled, the villain lay broken, defeated, and powerless. The stolen quirks had dissipated, scattered into nothingness. Vader staggered, the force draining him faster than any physical attack could. His lightsaber slid from his grip as he fell to one knee, and the smoke around him began to curl upward in slow, almost mournful spirals. Midoriya rushed forward, one for all. Pulsing in concern, reaching toward him. Vader lifted his maskless face, just enough to speak, his voice a whisper carried on the wind. "Bring balance to your world," he said, each word heavy with meaning, laden with the wisdom of a life torn between darkness and redemption. His mechanical hand reached out briefly, brushing Midoriya's shoulder. The boy's eyes filled with tears, understanding the gravity of the moment, the sacrifice, the love, the hope. The heroes surrounded them, silent, awestruck. All Might knelt, placing a hand over his heart, while Bakugo's anger faltered into disbelief. Even the villains, those who had survived, paused, witnessing the final act of a being who had been feared as the embodiment of terror. And then, with one last shuddering breath, Vader slumped forward. The force dimmed, leaving only a stillness that was almost sacred. Midoriya caught him, holding the fallen Sith in a quiet embrace. Around them, the city trembled, but a calm began to settle, fragile yet undeniable. The war had ended. The battle had been won. And yet, in the silence that followed, the promise of Vader's final words hung in the air. A call to a new generation. A warning. A hope. A responsibility. Midoriya looked toward the horizon, toward the city that would rebuild, stronger and wiser, carrying the weight of balance in his heart. The Sith Lord had fallen, but the world and its heroes had been saved. The question lingered, unspoken. Could balance truly be achieved in a world forever changed by gods, quirks, and the Force? And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a new threat stirred, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The dawn broke over Yua High with a strange, fragile calm. Streets once shattered now bore scaffolds and cranes, and the scent of smoke and ozone lingered faintly in the air, a reminder of the battle that had reshaped the city and the world. The heroes moved among the ruins, tending to the wounded, rebuilding what could be rebuilt, and murmuring stories of the strange, armored figure who had walked among them. Darth Vader, the Sith Lord from another galaxy, had changed everything. And yet, what he had left behind was not simple triumph or terror. It was a question that would linger long after the rubble was cleared. Students and pro-heroes alike gathered in the central courtyard of UA, voices low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace. Midoriya stood among them, one for all's faint glow still clinging to him, and stared at the horizon. His mind replayed the moments that had defined the battle. Vader's calm, unyielding power, his ultimate choice to protect life instead of taking it, and the final words that now haunted the young hero's heart. Bring balance to your world. The weight of that message pressed down, a reminder that heroism was not always about winning, nor villainy always about evil. It was about choice. Kirishima, bruised but steady, spoke up, voice cutting through the murmurs. Do you think he was a villain or something else? His eyes searched Midoriya's face, seeking understanding. Bakugo scoffed at first, but even he hesitated, Memories of Vader's decisive strikes and sacrifices painting a picture that defied anger or vengeance. The city itself seemed to echo their uncertainty. Buildings rebuilt themselves slowly, streets repaired, but in every shadow lingered the memory of a man who had straddled the line between darkness and redemption. Midoriya knelt on the cracked pavement, the weight of what he had witnessed settling in. The lesson was simple yet profound. Even the darkest hearts were capable of change, of choosing selflessness over obsession, of sacrificing themselves for the greater good. And in that choice, there was hope. A strange, paradoxical hope that even those defined by fear could leave a legacy of light. Elsewhere, the world was taking notice. News outlets, social media, and hero networks struggled to reconcile the story of Vader. The invader, the destroyer, the savior. Was he a force of chaos, or had he been a catalyst, forcing heroes and villains alike to reconsider the nature of power? Discussions raged, debates flared, and everywhere the legend of the dark hero began to take shape. Back at UA, the students trained harder, inspired by the encounter, while teachers watched over them with cautious optimism. The school itself had become more than a place of learning. It had become a crucible for growth, a reminder that the world was bigger than any one battle, and that sometimes salvation could come from the most unexpected sources. Midoriya's resolve solidified. The Force had chosen him to carry a message, a responsibility that transcended quirks, galaxies, and history itself. And then, far above the planet, in the silent void of deep space, a faint signal flickered to life. A lonely Imperial droid stirred, illuminated by the dim glow of distant stars. Its sensors blinked and hummed as it processed the message, decades old, yet encoded with a precision that demanded attention. The droid transmitted across the void, a single, chilling phrase echoing in the darkness. Target world located. A ripple of unease passed through the galaxy, unseen by those on Earth, but potent nonetheless. Far away, forces that had once commanded fear and obedience now stirred again. Shadows of empires, long thought broken, began to coalesce, and the story of the dark hero, Vader, was not finished. His legend, his sacrifice, had left a mark that reached beyond time, beyond heroes and villains, into the farthest reaches of space. Midoriya, standing atop the remnants of UA's gates, felt the wind on his face and the memory of Vader's words in his heart. The city breathed around him, alive with the sounds of rebuilding, of laughter and determination. But he could not shake the feeling that the calm was temporary. The galaxy had shifted, and balance was not yet complete. Somewhere out there, beyond sight and comprehension, the seeds of a new threat had been planted. He clenched his fists, the glow of one for all intensifying, not in anger, but in understanding. The lesson of the dark hero was clear. Power demanded responsibility. Sacrifice was inevitable, and even the smallest act of compassion could ripple across worlds. And as the sun rose higher, casting light across a city, scarred yet resilient, the screen of the universe seemed to flicker with the promise of what was to come. A legend had ended, but a story had only just begun. Somewhere, deep in space, an Imperial fleet stirred. Somewhere, a dark signal pulsed. And somewhere, heroes on Earth prepared, unaware that their next trial would be unlike anything they had ever faced. The world was rebuilding. The legend of Darth Vader was cemented. And yet, in the vastness of the stars, a single message traveled, a harbinger of destiny. Target world located. The saga had ended. For now. but the shadow of the dark hero would echo forever.